तो वो बहके कहीं भी जा सकते हैं।
आप ठीक कह रहे हैं, मैं रुक जाता हूँ। काफी बहुत हो गया। भी बोल रहा है, और अभी आपकी फिल्म मस्त आवाज, मेरी जान बचाने का बहुत बहुत, और इस काम में मेरी इतनी मदद करने के लिए वादा करता हूँ आपका ये एहसान बहुत जल्दी चुका। उसकी जरूरत नहीं। मुझे तो बुरा लग रहा है कि तुम अब वापस नहीं आए। आपसे मिलने तो आता ही रहूंगा। तो मेरे साथ स्पीड पकड़ने चलोगे? हाँ, तो वोट के लिए अच्छा ढूंढ मिलना बहुत मुश्किल है। फिक्र मत करो, मैं पुलिस की सैलरी से ज्यादा पैसे दूंगा। तो कितने पैसे दोगे मुझे? वो सब हम किनारे पहुंच कर होटल में शराब पीते हुए डिस्कस कर लेंगे। चले। ओ, देखो किनारा दिखने लगा है।
Constantly, and I was desperate to get away. So as soon as I was old enough, I joined the army. Military life suited me. I served for 8 years and was going to re-enlist when I heard from a friend who had been in my unit. He had left the army the year before and was now working for a private security company. They were looking for new recruits with military experience, and my friend said that he would recommend me if I was interested. This job in the private sector sounded like a fantastic opportunity, not least because there were seriously big bucks on offer. After a sleepless night, I made a decision. It was time for me to move on. My new employers arranged a hotel for me to stay in while I looked for an apartment. The hotel was classy and all expenses were paid. I must admit, after all the years in army barracks, the hotel felt strange at first. The room was too large and too quiet. The bed was too big and too soft. After sleeping badly, I made the bed every morning before leaving for work. I knew the hotel paid staff to do this while I was out, but this was a force of habit. I had left the army, but the army had not left me. My first few days at work were also mind-numbingly boring, as I attended a series of induction meetings and presentations. I tuned out and I looked. Thankfully, I was then given my first assignment. I was part of the guard detail for a mega-rich I was a spoiled brat who made frequent appearances in the tabloids within his own. If he had been an ordinary Joe, he would have ended up in jail. But money clearly talked. On my second week as a part of his entourage, I had to help him out of a nightclub by a back entrance to try and avoid a sleazy photograph of him appearing. He was so intoxicated that he had no idea where he was, and he vomited on my shoes. I lost my temper and I called him a jerk. I shouldn't have spoken to a client of the company like this, no matter how odious they were. But at that moment in time, I did not care. I started to wonder if leaving the army had been the right thing to do after all. And to make things worse, the next morning I was called into a meeting with my supervisor. I assumed someone had arrested me for speaking out of turn to a client. But when I walked into the office, I saw the old comrade who had brought me on board drinking coffee with my supervisor. They both seemed relaxed and greeted me with smiles and handshakes. I was offered a coffee, and boy was it good. We settled into sofas placed around a glass table, and my supervisor asked me how it was going. I had figured out by now that none of the other bodyguards had complained about me. Thinking on it, they had probably felt the same way that I had. So I said what I thought my supervisor wanted to hear. It's going great. His smile grew wider and he turned to my old comrade. A scar ran across one of his cheeks. I had been with him when he had been injured. Afterwards, he had saved my life. In the chaos of conflict, these things came thick and fast, but the memory stayed. I liked him and trusted him, and I listened tentatively as he spoke. I've been authorized to tell you that the company has won a new contract. Financially, it's huge. It would take the company to a new level. It is also something that is on a strict need-to-know basis. Is that clear? I said without hesitation. Very. He took another drink of his coffee before continuing. Good. The company will be taking over a job that used to be carried out in-house by a government agency. We will be hunting down monsters wherever they're found. They are to be taken alive and transported to a government facility to be studied. And we want you on that team that will be out there in the field facing monsters. What do you say? Yes or no? I was not sure what to do. This was outside anything that I had ever imagined, and I needed to know more. I asked, what happens if I say no? And I could see the disappointment in his eyes. I guessed that he had recommended me to his superiors to work on this new contract, and if I turned it down, it would reflect badly on him. After a moment where he appeared to compose himself, he said, if you say no, your memory of this meeting will be chemically wiped and you can go back to babysitting clients with more money than sense. And if I say yes, I asked. He wrote a figure on a piece of paper on the desk and spun it around so that I could read it. There were a lot of zeros. That is the bonus you receive for every successful mission, he told me. I pursed my lips and whistled quietly. In that case, I said, count me in. I left the meeting feeling good. I had been attracted to this job in the first place by the salary, and now I was in line to earn even more. And I was going to be facing real challenges. There would be no more spoiled brats for me. I decided to celebrate by buying a new suit to replace the cheap one that I had bought at the mall when I left the army. I knew of a place within walking distance of the office and figured that there was no time like the present. I purchased an Italian-made black no-line suit. It was like crazy expensive. Back out on the seat, I dropped my old suit in a trash can and set off to buy some new shoes. I hadn't gone so far when my company phone rang. It was my supervisor. He got straight to it.
There's been a sighting of a possible monster. Location is being sent to you now. Attend immediately. Capture the creature and await transport to take it to the secure government facility.
I began to ask for more details, but he ended the call. I checked the address. It was a short cab right away. I brushed a bit of dust off the sleeve of my new suit and then raised my arm to hail a ride. 20 minutes later, I stepped out of the cab and saw the location that I had been given was in a side street. There were 3 men wearing overalls standing around an open manhole in the road. I double-checked that I was in the right place, and there did not seem to be a mistake, so I strolled up to the men and asked them for a sit-back. I was still in the dark and knew from past experience that if you acted like you knew what you were doing, people would often cooperate. All 3 men gave me a filthy look, and then one of them said in a distinctly unhelpful tone of voice, "The situation is that we're not going back down there until that thing's taken care of, whatever it is." His friends grunted in agreement. "Yeah, we're not paid enough as it is to do our job anyway," the man went on. Still trying to get some clarity on the situation, I asked, "What exactly is it that you do?" He looked at me like I was stupid and then answered, "We work for the city. We're sewage and network engineers." I looked at the open manhole cover and understand from down. The thing they must have seen and reported, the thing that I was there to capture, was in the sewer system underneath the city. I smoothed down a non-existent crease in my new suit and thought there was no way I could go down into the sewer. I took out my phone and called my supervisor. "I'm on site," I told him. "The potential monster is in the sewer. I need you to dispatch a team wearing protective gear to go down there. I will supervise from the street level." I heard his intake of breath down the line loud and clear, and then he growled.
Look, we told the government that we could deal with any situation quickly and efficiently. If we don't, we're gonna lose the contract. Get your butt down into the sewer and handle this yourself. Do it now.
He ended the call. It looked like I had no choice. I thought maybe that I could borrow some overalls from these city workers and get some more information from them. But while I had been on the phone and they had gone to sit in the van, I knew that there was no point asking them for any kind of help. I was on my own. Sighing, I began to descend the metal ladder affixed to the east side of the manhole. It was dark and the stench of the sewer was rising up to meet me. I reached the end of the ladder and found myself on a brick wall in the tunnel. It was there that I might have destroyed the fall. There was a pile of equipment on the walkway. It had presumably been abandoned by the workers as they got out of there in a hurry. I retrieved a large flashlight and a metal crowbar. This would have had a specific use in the sewer, but I wanted it as a weapon. Still had no idea what I was about to face, but odds were it was not going to be friendly. Feeling marginally better, I advanced along the walkway. I ran alongside and just above the channel carried the words. I wouldn't describe this as being liquid or being solid. The some grotesque state in between. It was flowing so slowly that it was possible to think that I was just sitting there, a foul, pathetic concoction. I had no idea what was in there. I mean, I knew what the obvious constituents were, but what else might have found its way down into the sewer? There could be blood and bile, maybe even small body parts that needed disposing of for horrendous reasons. And like everyone else, I had heard urban tales of gators that had been kept illegally as pets and then disposed of when they started to get too big. The thought of the monster being a gator that had grown to full size down in the sewer while feeding on rotten human flesh filled me with dread. Hoping beyond hope that the city workers had imagined the whole thing, there was nothing for me to fear. I trudged on. It was claustrophobic down there on top of everything else. The ceiling of the tunnel was only inches above my head, and I realized there was some kind of growth on it that I must have brushed against. My hair was full of a sticky fungal material, which was now on my hands and on the shoulders of my suit. As I was noticing this, I saw that I had also got a different type of gunk on one side of my trousers. No amount of dry cleaning would help, I knew that. I decided that I did want there to be a monster down in the sewer after all, one that I could hunt down and capture. I needed the bonus to make up for the ruined suit. Trying not to puke as the smell of the sewer grew even worse, I carried on with my search. I pointed the beam of the flashlight into the darkness of the waste. There didn't seem to be anything living in there beyond microbes, but then I saw the movement ahead. I paused and tried to hold the flashlight steady, but my hand had started to shake and the beam danced unsteadily over the waste. I still held the crowbar in my other hand and I didn't want to put it down to hold the flashlight with both hands. I told myself to get a grip. I had faced danger in combat zones as a soldier and to overcome my fear, but this was different. In the army, I always had my comrades by my side. Here, I was alone and dealing with the unknown. This was the thought that filled my mind as the beam from the flashlight revealed a shape in the waste. It emerged from the sewage and stood about 5 feet tall. I thought at first it was one dark being that was moving frantically, as if it was possessed. And then I saw tails flickering in the flashlight, and yellow fangs and red eyes. With a jolt of horror, I realized I was not looking at a single creature, but at dozens of huge rats writhing around to create a grotesque feral mass. There must have been more under the surface of the waste, forming the base of the hideous display, while the rats on top crawled over each other. I had no idea why the disgusting rodents were behaving in this way, but as I watched them, the mass grew in number and became ever more frantic. Rats began to be dislodged and fell back into the sewage. Some landed on the walkway and began to scurry towards me. I raised the crowbar even though I knew with what was left of my reason that there were too many rats for me to face down on my own, and their number continued to grow. Within what felt like seconds, there was a tide of rats heading my way. I braced myself. If I fell, I would be lost beneath hundreds of rats. Their sewer-coated fur would press against my face and their tails would strike me. And then they would begin to bite. The first scent of blood released would send them into a greater frenzy. They would tear me apart. As the rats rushed around my legs and scrambled over my feet, I used every ounce of willpower to stand my ground. For some reason, though, they were racing past me and not attacking. I couldn't see that lasting. Even if I had managed to stay standing, surely the first bite was only seconds away. I gritted my teeth and waited for the inevitable. But the rats kept rushing around me and they seemed to be thinning out. A hoarse, desperate laugh escaped my lips. Was I going to survive? Was I going to leave this strange, terrifying place unscathed? And then I saw something new. It was following in the wake of the rats, and I understood the rats' behavior. They had been running away from this. It had been a man once, but now it was an abomination. It was standing up to its waist in the sewage, its skin covered with slits. Its eyes were dark, primal orange, and its teeth were cracked and sharp. They looked like shards of glass. As I stared, open-mouthed at the monster, it reached out and grabbed one of the last of the rats, and then it tore with its teeth. Blood flowed down the scales on its chin as it devoured. The rat's tail was the last thing to disappear into its mouth, and then the monster looked up. It peered past the flashlight and straight at me. I could tell that it was sizing me up, maybe wondering if I would make a good meal. Its mouth opened in a smile laced with dark desire and it began to wade through the waist. Now it was closer. I could see that it had openings in the side of its head where a man's ears should have been. So it might have been able to hear me if I ordered it to surrender. It might have understood me. It might even have complied. But I was not going to take the chance. I raised the crowbar and got ready to strike. The monster was too quick though. Its arm shot out. It grabbed my ankle and pulled me into the waist. Instinctively, I clamped my mouth shut. I knew that if I swallowed any of the sewage, I would be poisoned, and that would have led to a slow and agonizing death. The monster wanted to end my time on this earth much sooner. As I landed on my back and weight splashed around me, clamped its filthy hands around my neck and began to squeeze. I thrashed around trying to break free. It was too strong. Drool dripped from its open mouth and its vicious teeth glistened as it leaned over me. I felt myself starting to pass out and I knew that I only had one chance. I used the last of my strength to bring my knee up into its gut, and this did the trick. Its grip on my neck loosened. I rolled away, managed to find my footing on the base of the tunnel, and then I struck. I brought the crowbar down onto the top of its skull. There was a sickening crack and the monster went limp. Gasping with exertion and still doing my best not to get any of the sewage in my mouth, I put my hands under its armpits and hauled the prone form up onto the wall plank. And then I dragged it backwards towards the manhole. Thankfully, it was out for the count and it didn't put up any fight. When I reached the manhole, I saw a beam of light shining down from the street. I hollered up and a voice called back, identifying themselves as a company man. It seemed my supervisor had sent backup after all. He helped me carry the monster back into the daylight. As we lay it on its back in the road, he said, "We're meant to take them alive so that they can be studied. A government vehicle has already been dispatched to collect it and take it back to their facility." I did not like his attitude. "It's knocked out, not dead," I informed him. Though if I had killed it, that would have been justified. It was the monster or me. He still wasn't convinced and had a sneer fixed on his face as the government transport turned up and three hard-faced figures got out and carried the monster into their vehicle. I watched it pull away with the strange specimen. The other company man was still being a jerk. He also had a car and I needed a lift, so I was not calling him out. He unlocked the car and I climbed in. I moved toward the passenger door, but as I reached out for it, he locked the doors. "There's no way you're getting in my car. You'll get sewage all over the seats." He started the engine and drove away. I gave him a one-fingered salute and then set off on the long walk back to the hotel. The doorman refused me entry at first, and I had to promise him a serious tip before he let me in via a door where the refuse was taken out. After throwing away my new and utterly ruined suit, I had to suffer the indignity of being hosed down by a cleaner. I changed into some old clothes that were found for me, and only then could I go up to my room. I fell onto the bed and was staring at the ceiling when the phone by the bed rang. It was my supervisor.
"Why are you not answering your phone?" He snapped.
My company phone was as ruined as my suit, and I had left it in a jacket pocket. I was about to explain this, but wasn't given the chance.
"And why are you not at the office? I need your report of the incident on my desk so that I can check it and send it on to the government. They need all the details as a part of their evaluation of the monster."
I closed my eyes and massaged my forehead.
"That's not good enough."
My supervisor bawled and hung up. I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. This is the pits. I said to the empty room and then went to have a very, very long and hot shower. Wearing clean, everyday clothes and holding an extra large and takeaway coffee, I headed back to the office. I wrote up my report and I emailed it. I did not get a response about that, but I did get a notification that a payment had been made into my bank account. I checked it out and saw that I had been paid my bonus. Sipping the coffee, I figured the corporate life was not all that bad. And when I was summoned to a meeting in one of the conference rooms, I once more had a spring in my step as I made my way there. My supervisor was seated around a long table with a group of men that I didn't recognize. One was writing something on a laptop. The rest were staring at a screen on the lap. The image shown on it took my breath away. It was of the monster that I had captured in the sword. The thing was strapped to a body limit. The restraints left unbreakable. Well, I hope so anyway, with the way the monster was struggling to get free. As it fought, a voice off screen said, "Stay still, this is your final warning." The monster paid no heed, and seconds later, its entire body tensed and cried out in agony, and then it slumped back against the board while smoke drifted off its stems. I had seen something like this once before on the deep web. It was what had happened when an electric current was passed through a body. This monster survived the shock and it was subdued, for now. It was air-conditioned in the conference room, but still I wiped away a deeper sweat. And then I realized my supervisor was looking at me suspiciously. "I hope you're not feeling any sympathy for that thing," he asked, his voice cold. "No," I replied quickly. It tried to strangle me and would have likely consumed me if it had had its way. That was the truth, but I still wasn't comfortable with what I was witnessing. I knew that I better put on a poker face to hide this, and fast. "Good," my supervisor said. "The government is giving us access to the video feed of the monster's interrogation, which is taking place at their facility. So watch and learn." I focused on the image of the monster. As I did, the voice off screen said, "Tell us why you're here." I didn't know if the speaker was in the room with the monster or observing from a different location in the facility, but they were clearly leading the interrogation. The monster did not respond to their question, and I was wondering if it even could when it growled. There was no sense in the sound though, no words. The interrogator tried again. "Tell us why you're here." And now the monster found its voice. "I was driven from my home," it snarled. "There is a feud between my family and the Clancys who lived along the river from us. The feud went back generations, and the tales of what started it varied depending on how much moonshine the old men and women had drunk. Apart from the feuding, we were no different than the other folk in the area. And then chemicals were dumped in the river and they changed my family and the Clancy's. We turned into monsters and we had to hide away from regular folk. But even with all that, the two families continued to fight. It was vicious. I'm talking eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. In the end, the Clancy's killed all my kinfolk and I knew that I had to get out or else they would have slaughtered me as well. I made my way to the coast under the cover of darkness and found an outlet from the sewer. I crawled into it and I walked for days in the darkness until I could hear the city over me. I figured I could make a new start here. There was plenty of rats to eat, and I thought I could avoid regular folk, but I got careless and I was seen by men who were fixing the sewer. I guess that's the end of me. To my amazement, a tear rolled down the monster's scaly cheek. It was still a hideous freak, but it was alone in the world and in exile, and the questioning was not over. "Tell us where you came from," the interrogator asked. When the monster didn't respond straight away, another question followed. "How many are there in the Clancy family?" The monster shook its head. It was done answering, I figured. But still, the questions kept coming. "What is the name of the river? Why do you claim it was chemicals that changed you into monsters?" When the questions remained unanswered, the interrogator must have lost what little patience they had. Another electric current ravaged the monster's body. I turned away, not wanting to watch, and I waited for my supervisor to ask me what my problem was. But his attention was all on the laptop and the conference table. He was nodding and looking pleased. "Good work," he murmured to the man whose laptop it was. And then he looked up at me and said, "We have a lead. The company has invested massively in AI-powered resources, and a search of county records online has unturned two neighboring families who seem to have disappeared off the face of the earth 20 years ago. The Clancy family and the Hogg family. Animals and tourists have also been going missing nearby over the last 2 decades. No remains have ever been found. I'm going to call my contact at the government and inform him that we're going to find these monsters and capture them in the next 24 hours. He'll be very impressed." The grin on his face as he said this was manic. My expression was more downbeat, because I had the sinking feeling that I knew who was expected to deliver on this wild promise. My supervisor was already hurrying out of the room. He halted for an instant in the doorway, looked back at me and said, "Why are you still here?" Hating that I had been proved right, I pushed myself to my feet. 6 hours later, I was stepping off a company plane into a stifling heat. My clothes were already sticking to my skin by the time that I had walked down the steps. The plane had landed at a small private airfield, and I could see the car waiting for me just beyond its gates. While I was in the air, calls from law enforcement to provide every assistance needed. I did not know what they had been told from the sour expression on the deputy's face as he slumped against the side of his car. He was not impressed at having to help an outsider from the city.
आवाज कम कर लो थोड़ी सी। बंदी कर दी है? क्या कह रहे हो? मैंने बोला उस आवाज कम करने के चक्कर में कि वैसे ही चश्मा पहन के सो है? क्या हो गया? Second. यार रीलोड कर लेता पहले से। पहले पूरा 100 एडिशन हो, उसके बाद वो बैटल पास। मेरा हो गया आज का। रिप्लेस कहाँ से लिखते हैं? Anyways,